Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week you'll have to indulge me, listener. I'm presenting part of the Don Rodriguez stories, which originally I cut out, but I want to put back in. It's a humorous interlude in which Don Rodriguez is attempting to have a chivalric combat, and his squire thinks that chivalry is for idiots. Usually I'd say that stats will accompany this in the podcast, but the Hidalgo that Don Rodriguez faces is so similar to him that you may as well just use his stats. Thanks again to Ed Humple from LibriVox.
Rodriguez strolled slowly on the deep dust of that street, as though wondering all the while where he should go. And soon he and his mandolin were below that very balcony whereon he had seen the white neck of Serafina gleam with the last of the daylight. And now the spells of the moon charmed earth with their full power. The balcony was empty. How should it have been otherwise? And yet Rodriguez grieved, for between the vision that had drawn his footsteps and that bare balcony below shuttered windows there was the difference between a haven sought over leagues of sea and sheer uncharted cliff. It brought a wistfulness into the music he played, and a melancholy that was all new to Rodriguez. Yet often, and often before, had that mandolin sent up through evening against unheeding space that cry that man cannot utter, for the spirit of man needs a mandolin as a comrade to face the verdict of the chilly stars, as he needs a bulldog for more mundane things. Soon, out of the depth of that stout old mandolin, in which so many human sorrows had spun tunes out of themselves, as the spiders spin misty grey webs, till all was haunted with music, soon the old cry went up to the stars again, a thread of supplication spun of the matter which else were distilled in tears, beseeching it knew not what. And, but that fate is deaf, all that man asked in music had been granted then. What sorrows had Rodriguez known in his life that he made so sad a melody? I know not. It was the mandolin. When the mandolin was made it knew at once all the sorrows of man, and all the old unnamed longings that none defies. It knew them as the dog knows the alliance that its forefathers made with man. A mandolin weeps the tears that its master cannot shed, or utters the prayers that are deeper than its master's lips can draw, as a dog will fight for his master with teeth that are longer than man's. And if the moonlight streamed on untroubled, as though fate was deaf, yet beauty of those fresh strains, going starward from under his fingers, touched at least the heart of Rodriguez, and gilded his dreams, and gave to his thoughts a mournful autumnal glory, until he sang all newly as he had never sung before, with limpid voice along the edge of tears. A love song old as the woods of his father's valleys, at whose edge he had heard it once drift through the evening. And as he played and sang with his young soul in the music he fancied, and why not, if they care aught for our souls in heaven, he fancied the angels putting their hands each one on a star, and leaning out of heaven through the constellations to listen. "A vile song, señor, and a vile tune with it," said a voice quite close. However much the words hurt his pride in his mandolin, Rodriguez recognized in the voice the hidalgo's accent, and knew that it was an equal that now approached him in the moonlight round a corner of the house with the balcony, and he knew that the request he courteously made would be as courteously granted. "Señor," he said, "I pray you to permit me to lean my mandolin against the wall securely, before we speak of my song." "Most surely, señor," the stranger replied, "for there is no fault with the mandolin." "Señor," Rodriguez said, "I thank you profoundly." And he bowed to the gallant, whom he now perceived to be young, a youth tall and lithe like himself, one whom we might have chosen for these chronicles had we not found Rodriguez. Then Rodriguez stepped back a short way and placed his kerchief on the ground, and upon this he put his mandolin and leaned it against the wall. When the mandolin was safe from dust or accident, he approached the stranger and drew his sword. "Señor," he said, "we will now discuss music." "Right gladly, señor," said the young man, who now drew his sword also. There were no clouds, the moon was full, the evening promised well. Scarcely had the flash of thin rapiers crossing each other by moonlight begun to gleam in the street when Morano appeared beside them and stood there watching. He had bought his bacon and gone straight to the house with the balcony. For though he knew no Latin he had not missed the silent greeting that had welcomed his master to that village, or failed to interpret the gist of the words that Rodriguez's dumb glance would have said. He stood there watching while each combatant stood his ground. And Rodriguez remembered all those passes and feints that he had had from his father, and which Sevastiani, a master of arms in Madrid, had taught in his father's youth. And some were famous and some were little known. And all these passes, as he tried them one by one, his unknown antagonist parried. And for a moment Rodriguez feared that Morano would see those passes in which he trusted foiled by that unknown sword, and then he reflected that Morano knew nothing of the craft of the rapier. And with more content at that thought he parried thrusts that were strange to him. But something told Morano that in this fight the stranger was master, and that along that pale blue, moonlit, unknown sword lurked a sure death for Rodriguez. He moved from his place of vantage and was soon lost in large shadows, while the rapiers played and blade rippled on blade with a sound as though death were gently sharpening his scythe in the dark. And now Rodriguez was giving ground. Now his antagonist pressed him. Thrusts that he believed invincible had failed. Now he parried wearily and had at once to parry again. The unknown pressed on, was upon him, was scattering his weakening parries, drew back his rapier for a deadlier pass, learned in a secret school, in a hut on mountains he knew and practised surely, and fell in a heap upon Rodriguez's feet, struck full on the back of the head by Morano's frying pan. "Most vile knave!" shouted Rodriguez as he saw Morano before him with his frying pan in his hand, and with something of the stupid expression that you see on the face of a dog that has done some foolish thing which it thinks will delight its master. "Master, I am your servant," said Morano. "Vile, miserable knave!" replied Rodriguez. "Master," Morano said plaintively, "shall I see to your comforts, your food, and not your life?" "Silence!" thundered Rodriguez as he stooped anxiously to his antagonist, who was not unconscious but only very giddy, and who now rose to his feet with the help of Rodriguez. "Alas, señor," said Rodriguez, "the foul knave is my servant. He shall be flogged, he shall be flayed, his vile flesh shall be cut off him. Does the pain hurt you, señor? Sit and rest while I beat the knave, and then we will continue our meeting." And he ran to his kerchief, on which rested his mandolin, and laid it upon the dust for the stranger. "No," said he, "my head clears again. It is nothing." "But rest, señor, rest," said Rodriguez. "It is always well to rest before an encounter. Rest while I punish the knave." And he led him to where the kerchief lay on the ground. "Let me see the hurt, señor," he continued. And the stranger removed his plumed hat as Rodriguez compelled him to sit down. He straightened out the hat as he sat, and the hurt was shown to be of no great consequence. "The blessed saints be praised," Rodriguez said. "It need not stop our encounter. But rest a while, señor." "Indeed, it is nothing," he answered. "But the indignity is immeasurable," sighed Rodriguez. "Would you care, señor, when you are well rested, to give the chastisement yourself?" "As far as that goes," said the stranger, "I can chastise him now." "If you are fully recovered, señor," Rodriguez said, "my own sword is at your disposal to beat him sore with the flat of it, or how you will. Thus no dishonour shall touch your sword from the skin of so vile a knave." The stranger smiled. The idea appealed to him. "You make a noble amend, señor," he said as he bowed over Rodriguez's proffered sword. Morano had not moved far, but stood near, wondering. What should a servant do if not work for his master, he wondered, and how work for him when dead? And dead, it seemed to Morano, through his own fault if he allowed any man to kill him when he perceived him about to do so. he stood there puzzled, and suddenly he saw the stranger coming angrily towards him in the clear moonlight with a sword. Morano was frightened. As the hidalgo came up to him, he stretched out his left hand to seize Morano by the shoulder. Up went the frying pan. The stranger parried, but against a stroke that no school taught or knew, and for the second time he went down in the dust with a reeling head. Rodriguez turned toward Morano and said to him, "No, realism is all very well, and I know that my duty as author is to tell all that happened, and I could win mighty praise as a bold, unconventional writer. At the same time, some young lady will be reading all this next year in some far country, or in 20 years in England, and I would sooner she not read what Rodriguez said. I do not, I trust, disappoint her. But the gist of it was that he should leave that place now and depart from his service for ever." And hearing those words, Morano turned mournfully away and was at once lost in the darkness, while Rodriguez ran once more to help his fallen antagonist. "Señor, señor," he said, with an emotion that some wearing centuries in a cold climate have taught us not to show, and beyond those words he could find no more to say. "Giddy, only giddy," said the stranger. A tear fell on his forehead as Rodriguez helped him to his feet. "Señor," Rodriguez said fervently, "we will finish our encounter come what may. The knave is gone, and—" "But I am somewhat giddy," said the other. "I will take off one of my shoes," said Rodriguez, "leaving the other on. It will equalize our unsteadiness, and you shall not be disappointed in our encounter. Come," he added kindly. "I cannot see so clearly as before," the young hidalgo murmured. "I will bandage my right eye also," said Rodriguez, "and if this cannot equalize it—" "It is a most fair offer," said the young man. "I could not bear that you should be disappointed of your encounter," Rodriguez said, "by this spirit of hell that has got itself clothed in fat and dares to usurp the dignity of man." "It is a right fair offer," the young man said again. "Rest yourself, señor," said Rodriguez, "while I take off my shoe." And he indicated his kerchief, which was still on the ground. The stranger sat down a little wearily, and Rodriguez, sitting upon the dust, took off his left shoe. And now he began to think a little wistfully of the face that had shone from the balcony, where all was dark now, in black shadow, unlit by the moon. The emptiness of the balcony and its darkness oppressed him, for he could scarcely hope to survive an encounter with that swordsman, whose skill he now recognized as being of a different class from his own, a class of which he knew nothing. All his own feints and passes were known, while those of his antagonist had been strange and new, and he might well have even others. The stranger's giddiness did not alter the situation, for Rodriguez knew that his handicap was fair and even generous. He believed he was near his grave, and could see no spark of light to banish that dark belief. Yet more chances than we can see often guard us on such occasions. The absence of Serafina saddened him like a sorrowful sunset. Rodriguez rose and limped with his one shoe off to the stranger, who was sitting upon his kerchief. "I will bandage my right eye now, señor," he said. The young man rose and shook the dust from the kerchief and gave it to Rodriguez with a renewed expression of his gratitude at the fairness of the strange handicap. When Rodriguez had bandaged his eye, the stranger returned his sword to him, which he had held in his hand since his effort to beat Morano, and drawing his own, stepped back a few paces from him. Rodriguez took one hopeless look at the balcony, saw it as empty and as black as ever, then he faced his antagonist, waiting. "Bandage one eye, indeed," muttered Morano, as he stepped up behind the stranger and knocked him down for the third time, with a blow over the head from his frying pan. The young hidalgo dropped silently. Rodriguez uttered one scream of anger and rushed at Morano with his sword. Morano had already started to run, and knowing well that he was running for his life, he kept for a while the start that he had of the rapier. Rodriguez knew that no plump man of over 40 could last against his lithe speed long. He saw Morano clearly before him, then lost sight of him for a moment and ran confidently on pursuing. He ran on and on, and at last he recognised that Morano had slipped into the darkness, which lies always so near to the moonlight, and was not in front of him at all.